Thank you everyone for joining us for today's webinar. So I'm super happy to have our team here from UVM presenting with us today. So the topic at hand is improving goat dairy milk quality. And just a few housekeeping things before we get started. So my name is Glenda Pereira. I am the UMaine dairy specialist here within the University of Maine Cooperative Extension. And so I have a statewide role within the dairy sector. I am based in Orono for folks who haven't had a chance to meet me. But hello, reach out, and I think everybody got my contact info. So if you have further questions from this webinar, I'd be happy to chat and facilitate between myself and the team at UVM. We are going to keep all questions until the end of the session. However, if you would like to use the chat to write your questions in, if you have a question that's happening while the presenters are presenting, please feel free to type it in the chat and we can circle back to that at a later time. Uh, like I mentioned, we'll have a time for Q&A, and I have asked everybody to mute themselves. So once the Q&A starts, you'll have the capability to unmute and share verbally if you'd like. I'm pretty sure that's everything I wanted to cover. And so thank you again to our UVM team for being here. I'm going to let everybody introduce themselves. So Kelsie and Whitney, would you take it away?
Yeah, great. Thank you, Glenda. Thank you to the UMaine team, Glenda, Rachel, and Melissa for hosting us. We're really happy to be here and see so many people have joined for this webinar, Improving Goat Dairy Milk Quality, Lessons from Parlor Audits in Vermont. I am Kelsie Braam, and I work at UVM Extension as a dairy and grazing specialist. So I work with cow, goat, and sheep dairies across the state of Vermont. And I will let the other members of our team, and maybe if Rachel's here, could introduce themselves as well. So I'll pass it to Whitney.
Yeah, I'm Whitney Hall. I am a dairy specialist with UVM Extension. I work primarily with cow and goat with a focus on milk quality.
Maybe Holly.
I am Holly Menguc. I am owner and operator of Tups Crossing Farm, which is a commercial goat dairy. We ship to Vermont Creamery, and we have 450 goats under management. And I was a technical advisor for UVM Extension in this project.
And I'm Daryll Breau. My husband, Miles Hooper, and we own Ayresbrook Goat Dairy in Randolph, Vermont, where we are milking about 500 goats with ambitions to grow. I also work for UVM Extension as a technical advisor for the goat dairy industry in the Northeast and played a part in facilitating this project.
Great.
And Rachel did join us. So Rachel, if you don't mind just sharing who
Yes,
you are.
hello. Sorry, I'm keeping my camera off. I'm homesick and I am not feeling well. I work for UMaine Cooperative Extension. I'm a livestock educator. I do see some familiar names on our participant list. I do work with many small ruminant producers here in the state. And yeah, welcome to the Vermont team.
Great. Thanks, Rachel. Okay, so a little overview of this project. So this round of the Vermont Goat Dairy Research and Technical Assistance was funded by the Northeast Dairy Business Innovation Center, and it's the second round of this type of work. The previous round in 2022 to 2023 was co-sponsored by and funded by the Northeast Dairy Business Innovation Center as well as Vermont Creamery. And that previous round of research, the heart of it was interviews with 20 of the 35 or so goat dairies in the state of Vermont. And one of the findings or one of the things that we heard farmers express a need for was milk quality testing. And so this round of the goat dairy work was meant to kind of address that stated need. And the goals were to provide milk quality testing, so including parlor audits and milk and water testing directly to farmers in Vermont, as well as provide follow-up technical assistance to implement findings. Additionally, to continue refining a financial calculator tool and do some cost of production work specific to goat dairies in Vermont. And this project also included more regional outreach. So part of the reason why we're here in Maine, hoping to share our findings and also get feedback from Maine farmers. Yeah, we have the next slide. So the heart of this work were these milk quality testing and interviews. So 16 farms enrolled. Like I said, there are about 35 grade A goat dairies in Vermont, meaning 35 goat dairies that either ship milk to a processor or are doing on-farm processing. And here in Vermont, we have Vermont Creamery. So there are about 12 goat dairy farms in Vermont that ship bulk fluid milk to Vermont Creamery, and the remainder are farmstead creameries. So of the 16 farms that enrolled for this milk quality testing project, about half were ones shipping to Vermont Creamery, and the other half were farmstead creameries. They ranged broadly in size from as small as 14 milking does up to a farm with 950 milking does. The services provided, so it was a collaborative effort between Cornell's Quality Milk Production Services, QMPS, and Dr. Paul Verkler of QMPS, or formerly of QMPS, would visit farms with a TA provider from UVM. So either Holly, Daryll, or Whitney would go with Paul to each farm. And those visits were done mostly in 2025. Then each farm would receive a follow-up visit to talk about the findings and discuss next steps. And then after that, each farm was also interviewed. And I will pass it over to Whitney now.
Great. So I'm going to talk a little bit about more of the details of what we found during this milk quality session. So the two different services that were available through QMPS were a parlor audit, or what QMPS refers to as an extension survey, and a wash analysis. So the purpose of parlor audits is troubleshooting environmental mastitis or high cell counts. That's not the only reason somebody might do this. Some farms just like to do routine checks in the parlor, and this is the easiest way for them to do that. But basically what this entails is the technician from QMPS comes in and observes the milking routine. So looking at things like scoring the teat ends, cleanliness of those teat ends, timing the milking routine. So how long does it take from the time the goats walk into the parlor until they exit? Looking at unit alignment. So how is that milking machine situated on the udder? Looking at pre or post teat dip coverage, looking at milk flow to look for bimodal, which we'll talk about a little bit later, as well as looking at udder hygiene and overall cleanliness of the goat when they come into the parlor. They also test the milking equipment, so that includes the pulsators as well as vacuum pressure. And then you can additionally add on bulk tank sampling or individual sampling if there are individual animals that you're concerned about or you know that they have a high somatic cell count. And then the wash analysis is used to troubleshoot high bacterial counts. And so that involves analyzing the wash routine after milking. So looking at things like temperature of the water, what's the alkalinity or the pH of that water when you're doing those different rinse cycles, slug speed, things like vacuum pressure and vacuum drop throughout that wash cycle, sanitizer routines. You can also add in testing of the water. And this can be done alone. During this project, we didn't conduct any wash analyses by themselves. And a little more than half of the farms did receive a wash analysis in addition to the Parlor audit. And so just a little overview before we get into some of the findings, a little bit of a definition of some of the terms we might discuss later on. So one thing you might hear is standard plate count, often referred to as SPC. So that's an indication of the total number of bacteria that are present in the milk during the time that that sample is taken. Oftentimes this happens when somebody picks up bulk milk. So then the milk is plated, incubated for 48 hours at 90 degrees. If you have a high SPC count, that could be due to poor cleaning of the milking system or animals that have a lot of dirt or poor udder hygiene. And then preliminary incubation count, or what's often referred to as a PI count, that reflects milk production practices. When they're testing this, milk's held at 55 degrees for 18 hours before it's plated. And high levels are associated with poor cleaning or sanitizing of the milking system, typically not related to the livestock. This one is something that's more focused on the cleaning of the equipment. And then lab pasteurized count, or LPC. This estimates the number of bacteria in milk that can survive pasteurization. So this is a really important one. Milk gets heated to 145 degrees for 30 minutes, and then the SPC treatment is performed. So high LPC is generally associated with cleaning failures in the milking system or significant contamination from soiled livestock. And then coliform counts measure bacteria that are commonly associated with manure or environmental contamination. Milk gets plated on a selective media that encourages that coliform growth and also inhibits growth of other bacteria. And coliforms can come from a bunch of different sources, but typically they come from manure, the environment, so something like bedding, or rarely coliform mastitis. So a summary of the findings, we're going to go over both the Parlor audit findings as well as the wash analysis. So first we'll go over milking equipment, then we'll talk about the milking routine, mastitis, and then some key takeaways from the Parlor audits. So equipment was one of the major findings from this project. So examples of some of those equipment issues that we found on the farms we tested were vacuum levels, pulsation rates, pump capacity. And just to give you an idea of the prevalence of the equipment issues on the farms that participated, over half, 56% of the farms were found to have milking equipment as their top priority. So Dr. Verkler from QMPS ranked the order of the issues that he found on farms as the most important to less severe. So he ranked each farm to give them 3 top priorities, and over half of the farms were found to have milking equipment as their top priority. And 88% of the farms had milking equipment as one of their top 3 priorities. So talking about milking routine a little bit, examples of milking routine issues are teat end cleanliness, post-dip coverage, and lag time. And just to give you an idea of the prevalence of the milking routine issues, 38% of farms had milking routine as the top priority, and 81% of farms had milking routine within that top 3 list. And mastitis, this wasn't a major finding. We didn't have a lot of farms that were dealing with mastitis as a problem, but we did find several farms when we cultured animals to have a presence of Staph aureus. So 6% of farms, or just one farm, had mastitis as the top priority on the farm, and 31% of farms had mastitis as one of the top 3. So generally, when I refer to that, it just means that we did detect Staph aureus in some of the cows that were sampled, but it typically was not the biggest concern on a farm. And so some of the key takeaways from these Parlor audits were pulsator and vacuum settings, teat end scoring, teat end cleanliness, milking unit alignment, post-dip, management of Staph aureus, and milking routine lag time, with the caveat on lag time that more research is needed. Dr. Verkler is coming from a cow background and has done a significant amount of parlor audits in the cow world. And this was his first real experience doing a significant number of parlor audits on goat dairies. So a lot of the knowledge that he was applying was based on cows. So there's still a lot more research that we need to feel confident in knowing whether there is a lag time and how that might compare to cows. So some of the takeaways when we're talking about pulsator and vacuum settings. So recommended pulsator settings, the rate should be around 90 and your ratio should be 60/40. So I don't really expect you all to remember these, but this, if you're suspecting that you might have an issue with your pulsation rates, these are numbers that you could then give to an equipment dealer to ask them to test. So standardized settings for goats should be communicated to your equipment dealers. Probably a lot of you deal with the same issue that we have in Vermont, where the majority of equipment dealers focus on cow and may not be quite as experienced with goat equipment. So the issue with incorrect pulsation settings is that it could lead to poor massage, which then leads to poor milk letdown. And goats are different than cows, obviously, in the way that they let down their milk, but it is still an important factor in being able to completely milk that udder out. And then vacuum settings, these all come from the National Mastitis Council. So the recommended vacuum setting is 10 to 12 inches. You should check your vacuum gauge before every milking. Should have it tested and calibrated periodically. And incorrect vacuum settings can lead to, if it's too high, you can get over milking, which leads to teat end damage. If it's too low, you could risk having units that fall off while you're milking. And then teat end scoring. So when we're talking about this, we're talking about teat ends that are scored within 60 seconds after the unit detaches. And if you've ever pulled the unit off and you've kind of felt down the teat end, if there's some hardness at the teat end, that's kind of what we're talking about. That can be caused from over milking, leaving that unit on too long. But that can lead to an increase in somatic cell count or just an opportunity for bacteria to enter into that teat. So this is an example of a report that QMPS would give back to farms and showing them what the goal is for each one of those different metrics. And their goal is always to score at least 20% of the goats on the farm coming through the milking parlor. And then they provide the farm with actual data. So you could see this particular farm had a lot of goats with hardness at the teat end. So some opportunity there to improve that. And then QMPS is great. They always gave really practical tips for the farm to be able to adjust that. And this is just some more data with a picture about teat end scoring. So you can see that this picture has a little bit of hyperkeratosis on the end of that teat. So that would be what we would consider a poor teat end score. And skin condition and teat end scores are long-term changes, and those can also be another opportunity for bacteria to enter the udder and cause mastitis or an increased cell count. And so preventing teat end damage, you want to look at maintaining proper vacuum and pulsation settings, replacing your inflations per manufacturer recommendations. So most of those will have an estimated number of milkings that they should last for, and really trying to stick closely to that and replacing those on a regular basis. Taking units off as soon as milk flow slows to prevent over milking, and following correct milking routine, promote good letdown, and minimize the unit on time, especially when the animal doesn't have milk flowing. So damaged teat ends can lead to mastitis, elevated somatic cell count, and harder to milk out. So if you have a lot of animals with that hyperkeratosis that we saw on the last slide, that can make it a lot more difficult to milk those animals out. They can be a lot more uncomfortable in the parlor. Okay, so teat end cleanliness. This is a big one. Some of the recommendations would be to wear gloves, focus on the actual teat end during udder prep. So one thing we noticed on farms, this graphic over here shows you like a cotton swab with some alcohol on it and just wiping the actual like end of the teat. So a lot of farms did a really fantastic job getting the barrel clean, but they weren't actually wiping the end of that teat, which is really important to make sure that there's no organic matter on the end of the teat when you attach that unit, because that's all going directly through the unit and can pass bacteria both to other animals and things that can get into the milk. Using one paper towel per animal is always the recommendation. And if you're using cloth towels, to make sure that you're using a sanitizer in your laundry. And if you're suspecting that your towels might not be getting clean enough, you can always culture those. You can send them into a lab and they will take a culture and plate it. And poor teat end cleanliness can lead to mastitis, elevated somatic cell count, SPC, and potentially coliform counts. Okay, udder alignment. These are two really great pictures that illustrate both poor udder alignment and good udder alignment. So you want to make sure that the milkers are aware of the importance of even weight on both teat ends. As you can imagine, this animal is probably not having a really comfortable milking experience, whereas you can see both of these animals have really even alignment. There's not more weight on one side of that udder than the other. So uneven milking can lead to units falling off, squawking, goats not being fully milked out, teat end damage, all stuff that you don't want when you're milking goats. Okay, post dipping. So the recommendation, use a high quality post dip, typically iodine, chlorhexidine. You don't need to use something that has a really high level of emollients. Some folks will switch to those in the winter. One thing to be careful of when you're looking at post dips specifically designed for winter or cold weather is that those tend to be thicker and they can actually they can take a longer time to dry, which could leave the potential for that teat end staying wet and then leading to more bacteria. So always important to just look at your post dip and make sure that it's fully over that teat barrel, like this one on the left here is a good job of coverage. And this one over here you can see isn't really doing a great job of getting that full teat. Teat orifices are open for 30 to 120 minutes after milking. We probably need a little bit better research as to how long it takes a goat's teat ends to close, but still emphasizes the importance of post-dip to help prevent bacteria. And improper post-dip or inadequate coverage could lead to mastitis or elevated cell count. Okay, Staph aureus. So some of the recommendations for Staph aureus goats are that they should be milked last, or the unit should be sanitized after they're milked to avoid spreading it to other goats. It is a contagious mastitis that's passed between goats. You also carry it on your hands, which makes it really important to wear gloves when you're milking. If you think this is a significant issue on your farm, you could culture all first lactation goats or goats as they freshen in just to understand what their status is. And lag time. So we really need to understand what the lag time required for goats is compared to cows. So cows, we have a lot of research on. We know exactly how long it takes them to let down because cows are primarily under oxytocin, whereas goats are not as subject to oxytocin in order to let their milk down. So the goal, so take some of this with a grain of salt, but the goal is 30 to 60 seconds between the first stimulation. So typically that's putting pre-dip on until you attach the unit. If you're using pre-dip, the most important thing you should think about is contact time from the time that you put that pre-dip on until the time that unit goes on or the time that pre-dip is wiped off. So you really need at least 15 seconds of kill time. So if you're not doing a full prep like cow dairies would do, you may at least want to think about how long am I actually leaving that pre-dip on to make sure that it's truly killing whatever might be on that teat end. And then when we talk about bimodal milk, what we're talking about is this initial increase in milk when the unit goes on, and then a drop to basically no milk, and then we go back into flow. And so that's what you want to avoid. You want something like on the right, where the unit's attached, you immediately get milk, it kind of holds at a plateau, and then it drops off. So that's the goal. You likely won't know unless you have somebody that's coming out and graphing, but generally, when we're talking about my bimodal, it means there's a poor prep when we're talking about cows. Again, with goats, I think we just need more research to understand what would cause this bimodal. Is this an equipment issue, or is this actually like an udder prep or a lag time issue? So this was a finding, but again, take it with a grain of salt because we need to do more research in the goat space. All right, so now we're going to talk about the wash analysis findings. And we're going to talk about mechanical issues, water issues, chemical issues, and then some key takeaways. So some of the examples of mechanical issues are the slope of your milk line, your air injector and how often that might inject air into the system, bulk tank cooling, and the length of the downspout into the bulk tank in order to reduce splashing. And so as far as prevalence of these issues, 27% of the farms were found to have mechanical wash issues as their number one priority. And then 45% had mechanical issues as one of the top three priorities. So water issues, this actually turned out to be a really big one of the key findings. So we broke this down into three separate categories. The first was bacterial, second was temperature, and third was volume. So an example of bacterial is we found Pseudomonas in several of the farms that we took a water sample from. Temperature, we had a low water temperature, and volume was just the farm simply didn't have enough water based on calculations. So some examples of chemical issues, low chlorine levels due to water hardness. So those minerals can actually bind chlorine and not allow it to effectively clean all the equipment. And no farms had chemicals as the top priority issue. Just 18% had chemical issues as one of their top three priorities. So not a major finding, but something to be aware of if you have really hard water, that it could be affecting how effective your chemicals are. So key takeaways from our wash analysis. Pseudomonas was very prevalent on some of the farms that we tested. Hot water, air injectors, slope of the milk line, wash water volume, and timing of milk filter replacement. So Pseudomonas, of the 9 farms that we tested their water, so we took an actual sample from as close to the well as we could get, the hot water inside the milk house and the cold water inside the milk house. So of those 9 farms that had their water tested, 6 were positive for Pseudomonas. And so Pseudomonas was really affecting some of these farms. They were having persistently high LPC counts. And if you remember from earlier in the presentation, LPC is the lab pasteurized count, or bacteria that are able to survive the pasteurization process. So some of you probably don't have this when you're testing your water through state regulations. But this can contribute to a reduced shelf life for cheese or any other products that you're making. So it does have an impact on the finished product. And if you're curious about this, you can test your water, like I said, from the well and hot and cold in the milk house. You can send this away. We had our water samples sent to QMPS at Cornell, so I know QMPS can do those, and there are likely other labs that are able to run those samples as well. And one of the ways you can help treat Pseudomonas if you find that you have it in your well is by installing a hydrogen peroxide water treatment system, this is a picture of it here just in the utility room. And so that treats the water after it's come from the well into the barn before it goes into the milk house. So Pseudomonas is a very tricky bug if you have it. It's heat tolerant or thermophilic, meaning that it likes hot water and heat does not kill it. So it's thought that it can live in hot water tanks, and it also creates biofilms. So it can create, like if you've ever left a glass of water out for a really long time and it gets a little slimy, that's a biofilm. So it can create biofilms in your milk line, on your equipment, which make it really, really difficult to get rid of. So it is very persistent and can create some issues. So the recommended treatments, shock the well and your entire water system with chlorine periodically to reduce the overall level of Pseudomonas. And you could consider installing a water treatment system. So, like this hydrogen peroxide one, or there are UV filtration systems as well to help with the water. And this is an example of the results from water sample that we took. So QMPS did test specifically for Pseudomonas in addition to all of these other bacteria that you can see. And you can see that they didn't detect Pseudomonas in the hot or the cold water. They did detect it in the well, but then when they plated it, and they could detect it at levels in all three sources. So QMPS is great. They have a really sensitive water system that they use for testing, so it can detect things at very low levels. And the main water testing requirements are over here on the left. And so your water would be tested annually for coliform and E. coli. So you likely may not be or you aren't testing for something like Pseudomonas or some of these other bacteria. So you could, if you were concerned or just wanted to know, you can always send those samples out. So hot water was another one. Your alkaline wash should start at least 160 degrees Fahrenheit, and the dump should be at least 120 degrees. So again, this is just a picture from the report. You can see that this farm was a little bit low on their end temperature. And then factors that can reduce your wash water temps. So a hot water heater that's not large enough, water heater settings if you don't have it allowed to be high enough temperature. If you have a lot of air injections into your wash system, that's going to affect the overall temperature. If you have significantly long pipelines, and if you have mineral buildup from excessively hard water in your water heater, that doesn't allow that coil to work as well. And so some results of low water temperature, organic soil removed during the wash is redeposited into the milking system and could cause elevated SPC or PI counts. Air injectors, so some of the components of pipeline washing, we're looking at water volume, temperature, the concentration of the chemicals, and slugging, which is actually the physical agitation of that water moving through the system. So it's a specific volume of wash solution that's forced through the pipeline by the air injector. And the slug is pushed and it's kind of doing that mechanical scrubbing of the interior pipeline. And the slug terminates in the receiver and it's breaking apart forcefully and it cleans that surface of the receiver. So this is a picture of the graph of some of those different slugs throughout the different cycles. And it kind of tells you, like in your main wash cycle, the goal is between 20 and 30 slugs. And if you suspect that you're having some issues with your wash cycles or your air injector, reach out to your equipment dealer, have them perform some of these tests. And slug analysis, which is what these three pictures show, they're looking at the vacuum drop, slug volume, and the slug speed, which all contribute to how effectively that wash cycle is working. And then wash water volume. So the technicians from QMPS were able to calculate the volume of water that was needed for the main wash. And then they would compare that with what the actual fill volume was in the wash sink. And so if the volume is too low, you want to adjust your settings and the fill settings and the chemical settings as well. So making sure that your chemical settings match how much water you have. And you can just see that this is a report on the right from QMPS again, confirming that the water volume wasn't sufficient based on their calculations. So they calculated that the farm needed 57 and the actual volume was 37 and a half. So the farm had additional capacity in that sink, so they were able to make some adjustments there. And then slope of the milk line, you want to make sure that your milk line is sloped appropriately for the entire length so that it's draining after each cycle. And low spots or inadequate slope would lead to insufficient cleaning, and that can again lead to high SPC or PI counts. And then the milk filter. So run a milk filter at least through the rinse cycle to prevent recirculation of debris through the system. This is just a picture of the milk filter, so as you can see, it's pretty clean. And then just some recommendations. So some resources for Maine farms, as far as milk testing goes, whether that's individual animals or bulk tank milk samples, would be through the Maine Milk Quality Lab, the UMaine Diagnostic Lab. You can also send samples to Cornell. They have 6 QMPS labs in New York State, and you can find information on their website. And then Dairy One takes milk samples as well. And as far as equipment testing, Central Maine Dairy Equipment can do equipment testing. And then IBA does have a Northeast team that travels around and they do these Parlor audits as well, and they can test your equipment. And then for technical assistance, both Glenda and Rachel are available at UMaine, and then our team is available to answer questions as well. And we would love it if you would take just a minute. Kelsey's going to drop the link to this in the chat if you don't want to scan the QR code. We would love if you would take our quick survey. It's very short. So we're trying to build out a technical assistance profile for the Northeast, and we would really like to know if there's something you don't feel you have access to as a goat dairy farmer, or if you have a provider, like a service provider that you really like working with. We would also love to know about that as well. And I think we will open it up for questions.
Yeah, we're all available for questions, and Holly and Daryll both participated in this project as service providers working with other farms and had the testing done on their farm. So they are great resources to answer questions. Yeah. Caitlin, you have your hand up.
Hi, I was just wondering if any of the farms surveyed didn't use a pipeline and used bucket milkers, because that's what I use. And so a lot of this info is really helpful, but thinking specifically how to wash that equipment is, the whole 22 cycles. I don't know how I would replicate that at my facility.
Yeah, we definitely did have farms that just use bucket milkers. And then, I think just doing a good job washing, a lot of those farms just washed with hot water and soap. I think because you're washing it so often, it's not like a pipeline where there are spots where that milk can sit and build up if you don't have proper slugs. But Daryll and Holly, feel free to jump in.
I know personally I've been on farms where they'll use a bucket milker, but in their sink, they still have a small air injector where they can hang the claw into the wash water and cycle it through. If you have something like that, then this would be somewhat applicable. Otherwise, if you are washing in the sink, The guidelines for the heat temperatures would probably still be applicable to make sure you're cleaning the full interior of that silicone line and the claws themselves. And if you do have access to both the detergent and acid, it is best practice.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would say most of the things are still applicable that, yeah, water temperature, chemical concentration, like you were saying, Holly, and agitation. And when I've worked in systems that use bucket milkers, we had the vacuum line to clean it, but then also once a week doing a manual scrub with either like a manual acid cleaner or a more heavy duty alkaline detergent. And like changing the inflations, all those things, yeah, still applicable. So it might just be the pipeline cleaning that's not, yeah.
And I just wanted to note that you are welcome to unmute yourself and share, or you can type into the chat if you'd prefer. And I don't know, I know you answered this in the chat, Kelsie, but as we wait for folks, somebody had asked if the T10 cleanliness scorecard was conducted prior to or after milking, and you had mentioned that it was both. So you guys evaluated before milking and after the pre-dip.
Right. So I
So
think it's at the
yeah.
stage you're cleaning it right to see what would go into the milk tank. So they've done all their teat prep, and then right before is just confirm right before the unit went on is when you would score that. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then teat end, like the changes to the actual teat end happened after the milking unit was removed.
I have another question. There's several different styles in terms of the claw you use on goat systems, and they kind of vary. I use the Westphalia GEA, which has the automatic shutoffs. I know in the cow world, they have very fancy technology for like automatic takeoffs and shutoffs. Was there any information gathered around claw type, how the vacuum was turned on and off by the, technician, and how that also affected teat health? Because that's something I think about in my farm, or even, how those units can fit a wide variety of teats if you talked about the unit alignment on an udder.
Yeah, we looked more at over milking. So if that unit was left on the teat end, and we did have, Holly, correct me if I'm wrong, at least two of you had automatic takeoffs. Yeah,
More than that, yeah. There are
yeah.
quite a few. I think it's pretty consistent among the larger dairies to have those auto takeoff units like a cow farm has. And but even with that system, which is wonderful because it kills the vacuum, which allows there not to be any pull at the removal from the teat end. Even with that system, you have to program it to turn off when you at a certain milk flow rate. So making sure that that auto takeoff unit is adjusted to a milk flow rate that doesn't leave milk in the udder, but also doesn't over milk is also, we found a problem on a couple of farms where the unit itself wasn't set right. But I know that I think having those little things that you push on the bottom, right, to kill the vacuum at the removal, it's really wonderful for the udder health, because you just don't want to have that moment where you're pulling hard and it's like sucking the, get it off. That can cause edema at the teat end.
Did that answer your question?
I think for sure, and it might not be a question that's necessarily going to be covered in this presentation, but just because there is such a larger industry in Vermont for these farms, like I don't know any really farms in Maine that are milking 900 goats. There just seems to be a lot more trial and error out there, and that's what, as a smaller, newer producer, I feel like I sometimes feel like I'm chasing different, information and spending money trying to get equipment that is maybe sized more for like a hobby producer and that is potentially gimmicky versus actually effective technologies that have been developed for the industry.
Absolutely. I totally understand that feeling. I think Daryll or myself would be happy to speak with you privately and try to, troubleshoot. I know I've used a few different liner brands. I think I use Interpulse out of Italy right now, but I've also used the Westphalia ones in the past. I think more than brand type, I think replacing them at the correct intervals, making sure they're not twisted within the cups, and making sure they're hanging properly are going to be things that to troubleshoot. I know on my own farm, I didn't really. What was news to me was the fact that if it's hanging unevenly, what Paul was saying, Dr. Werkler was saying that in the cow world, because the shells are stainless, there's quite a lot of weight on those teats that pull down. But because we're using the silicone and the plastic shells, they're very light. And so even a little bit of an unbalance is going to get you like an imbalance in the milk letdown.
Thanks.
Daryll, did you have thoughts on claws or inflation types or yeah, or all of you was there like a dominant or more common type that you saw across farms or have in your own experience seen work better or less well?
I don't really have experience with it outside of my farm. I know, and honestly, I think Holly and I use the same equipment, and a couple of the other farms I went to use the same equipment. So unfortunately, I don't have much to say um, about the inflations and that sort of stuff. But I can second Holly's comment about making sure that your auto takeoff is calibrated properly, because that's a really quick way to start over milking your goats. So.
There aren't any specific questions at the moment. I'd also like to just emphasize yet again the importance of having a technician come in and recheck your vacuum and your pulsation settings, because you could be doing the same thing for years and not realize that your vacuum pump has readjusted itself and you're no longer milking at a safe vacuum level. Or I know in my case, um, the documentation that we read when we started the farm gave a range of a safe scale of pulsation speed for a small ruminant. And we set it at the highest within that range, thinking that would get us to milk faster. Time is precious. And Paul came and said the lower setting is actually going to let your animals milk out quicker because of the release, what is it called, the massage phase that's necessary. So I had been milking for years. It was taking me longer to milk the whole herd for years because I had not understood the data that I was looking at. So having a specialist come in was incredibly useful for me personally.
That's a good point, Holly. I had the experience once of milking on a farm where we checked the vacuum level every day, and it was correct. But when QMPS came and calibrated it, it was actually not. So you could be looking at your gauge and saying, I'm in the right zone, but actually not be. And that's something you wouldn't know unless you had an equipment technician come out. And that can be really consequential, right, to teat health.
And the vacuum pressure can look okay on the gauge, and it can be very different at the actual animal level too. So that's an important thing to remember.
Well, we're on this topic. I'm curious, do you know what, and this can be an estimate off the top of your head, what a service like QMPS would potentially charge per farm to do an audit like this?
Great question.
Yeah, it obviously depends on the size. Um, Unfortunately, they're not available outside of New York anymore since Dr. Verkler left. Um, but I mean, I think it ranged from, as low as 1,500 to up closer to 4,000 or so. It depends on the number of animals you're testing and how many animals you're milking. So how long does it take to do that full analysis? Um, yeah.
But before you get discouraged, I know my IBA dealer has access to a lot of the same equipment. And if you begin that discussion, they can probably source this for you. And my dealer, in my recollection, never charged me for that service because it's part of me being, continuing to buy the chemicals and the products I need from him.
Yeah, that's correct. And I think their team is New England wide. Their milk quality team that has the same equipment as Dr. Verkler and can do all the same pulsation tests and those same graphs as well. They don't focus, they can, but they don't typically focus as much on like the teat end health and the udder hygiene. They certainly can if they're suspicious that there's a problem that's, caused by like teat end health or they're noticing it a lot. But the way they explained it to me was it's more focused on equipment. And they do a wash up analysis as well. So if you're located somewhere that's relatively close to a cow dairy that might already be utilizing the service, that might be one option to consider. And they did confirm with me that they do goat dairies as well. So if Central Maine Dairy is not able to make it to the farm, IBA might be another resource to look into.
Yeah, and I encourage if there's farmers on the call that have a service they've used before, if they have a contact, if you don't mind sharing it in the chat, other folks might be interested. Maybe you've had success and have done a parlor audit before. So I just wanted to um, throw that out there.
I just want to say as sort of my closing remark that like milk quality is an ongoing issue and you think you've tackled your problems and then next thing you know something else comes up. So, never assume that everything is working properly and develop on your farm uh your protocols or like your checklist of like check the water temperature, check the chemical levels, make sure your milk is cooling properly. Like improper cooling of milk can quickly lead to high bacteria counts. Do your California mastitis test to detect goats with high somatic cell counts. There are things that you can standard procedures that you can put into place to stay on top of this because I know from personal experience that the minute you become complacent and think everything is fine and sort of stop paying attention, something happens and you miss it and you have an issue on your hands. So it's just part of being just the diligence that you have to have. I mean, even when you're diligent, it can be difficult. So don't get discouraged if you're facing milk quality issues because there's a lot of moving parts. But yeah, do your best to seek out those professionals that can help you because I know a lot of us, it's just some of the information is just over our head dealing with the nuances of pulsators and vacuum line and all that stuff. And yeah, just like keep milking with your eyes open.
They don't have to be expensive fixes. The importance of having, if you have a bulk tank, having the tailpipe go down low enough that it reduces splash in the side of the tank, or if you're pouring your bucket into your tank and reducing the splash is going to have an instantaneous effect on your milk quality, and that costs nothing to pour more carefully.
We have a question from Carol in the chat for Daryll and Holly. How often I'm assuming the question is for Vermont Creamery picking up your milk, which
Yeah,
certainly
so
can impact on milk quality, right?
So we Vermont Creamery actually only picks up our milk twice a week. They're on a 3-day, 4-day pickup. And kind of unfortunately for us, the milk test that they do to detect for, your SPC, LPC, PI is on the 4-day pickup. Um, which is why it's even more important that your milk is like cooling properly. Um, and yeah, I think that that's pretty unusual. I think most creameries pick up milk on a 3-day schedule and it kind of rotates, or on the larger dairies in Vermont, they get milk picked up every single day, so that is a factor. And sadly, it's kind of a factor that's out of my control. But um,
I'm happy to ask another question, which is I was wondering if anyone on the call from UVM is a farmstead creamery, so changing their milk into other products, and if there are other aspects of milk quality that wasn't covered that they would like to share as maybe, like in terms of milk handling, like reducing, breaking up those fats as they're processing it, if that could be helpful.
Fortunately, both Daryll and myself are bulk milk farms. So we've visited a number of small farmstead creameries and producers, but I can't personally speak onto that side of the milk handling. There was a person who wanted to ask a question in the chat.
Yes, and sorry, Erin. On my end, it says you're not muted. So if you want to drop the call and come back in, we can try that again. Um,
It looks like she typed the question, is there a list anywhere of
yeah.
recommended milking units for milk safety and quality for small dairies?
I think we could put together a list of the most commonly used 2 or 3 brands as far as shells and liners. I think
I
they're probably
know. Yeah.
similar to each other. There is one that's triangular in shape in the inside profile instead of round. But I think it's going to be more about cleaning them and making sure you change them at the recommended intervals.
It might be useful to go local so that the equipment dealer, like there's Hamby Dairy Supply online where you could order things, but if you were working with Central Maine Dairy or your local IBA rep to order your equipment, then they would also be able to, service it and work with you on some of those testing.
Erin, do you want to try again? We can't hear you. Sorry, but I do have your email, so what I'm gonna do is I'll follow up and what um I believe it was Holly and Kelsie were saying while you were gone, uh, was that they can put an equipment list together and follow up and then suggested potentially working with your IBA dealer to um make suggestions and recommendations for what you can use.
Thank you.
I don't know if I guess would this list be helpful to other folks and um, maybe
Yeah, are you thinking, Holly, like a list of brands? I don't know, like Hamby Dairy Supply is the main place I think of for like small scale cow and goat milking equipment. But like I said, it might be better to go local with
I think it'd
Central
be
Maine
better to,
and
yeah,
IBA.
I agree with your suggestion, Kelsie. I think whatever brand your local dairy supply service provider has access to, whether it's Westphalia or Interpulse or et cetera, et cetera. I don't know if there's that much variation between the silicone liners themselves, with the exception that one of those brands does have a triangular shape to the interior, not circular. And I have not tried that brand. I think the important part is working with a technician who has access to them when you need another set and can help you figure out the correct rate of change for replacing them.
One of the things that I think is like areas for future research is the Pseudomonas question. And I'm really curious if this is something that's widespread on Vermont dairies generally, cow, goat, sheep. If it's a north, like is it happening in Maine? So and effective ways to treat it. Because I think yeah, maybe there's been varying levels of efficacy of the hydrogen peroxide treatments. And yeah, so I think this is one of the takeaways or like areas for future investigation. I don't know if Holly and Daryl, Whitney, you have thoughts on that or other things coming out of this that you think like directions for future research. Oh, I see Carol's unmuted too. Yeah. Carol?
Hi, I just had a question on the audit that I just thought of. Um, did does the audit include evaluating kind of the ergonomics of, the milking parlor for the milkers, the people milking? So I think sometimes that affects how they, can put the udders, the claws on and clean them, and then also, well, it sounded like there was the time in the parlor also, is it how long they milked? I I don't remember seeing results, but I didn't know if that was even measured.
That's a good question. Holly, Daryl, Whitney.
I don't recall Paul having like sort of a quantitative way of measuring that. Um, but I know he did make suggestions, ways that the employee could work or move more efficiently, like various ways that they could, if they clean the teats this way instead, or if they use cloth instead of paper, they could get a cleaner wipe, or, so he did make some suggestions, but I don't think it's an official part of the parlor. But yeah, you have to sort of to a certain extent set yourself up for success. And it's like if your parlor is designed in a way that it's just ergonomically, physiologically like impossible for you to get to the parts of the goat where you need to, or then um that that's annoying. Like that's something that you might want to address. You don't want to be working around a hangnail all the time. But Polly, do you recall if he
Yeah, I think it wasn't part of the formal report, but again, I think he definitely was making comments to people about having enough lighting. And of course, most of us are milking on platforms. And so the height of the platform and whether that gives you enough visibility to actually, see the teat ends, depending on how high or how tall the person is who's milking, and that variation, it comes into it. I think he was more one of the big takeaways, I think, for Paul, and I know for myself, seeing so many different parlors, was the variation in like goats milked per minute. And that has to do, I think, with the size of the farms too, and the incredible variation we have within the goat world. But I think maybe someone who's used to coming out of the cow world has seen more or less variation among parlor styles and milking styles. And I don't know if it plays directly into ergonomics, but how you build out your animal movement flow and your milking pattern, if you're dipping down the whole row and then going back to the start and attaching down a whole row versus going like this and going like that, and how the animals come in and exit, and how much time the milker is spending moving animals versus actually attaching and detaching units. There was great variation across the farms in levels of efficiency there.
Right.
So if someone on the call is interested in beginning a goat dairy and doesn't yet have a parlor created, I highly recommend visiting as many other dairies as you can, so you can pick and choose ideas that you like, that you think could work in your own setup.
Right. I have a was the total amount of time milking per milking? I mean the whole time, like from turn on the vacuum to finishing. Was that recorded as part of the evaluation?
I don't think so, because that would, there's this, if you're milking 300 animals, it takes this amount. If you're milking 10, it takes this amount. But at each farm, he did record from the moment a goat enters the space to when she leaves again. We do have an average length of time that an individual goat is in a parlor for every farm that was studied.
Right. Yeah, that's important.
Yeah, I think he started the clock when the first goat entered. Like if you're milking 10 on a side, he started the clock when the first goat entered, and then he ended the clock when the last goat that entered in the unit came off.
Right.
So sort of like the whole milking time. And yeah, for sure. I mean, be super, super diligent about doing your research, because, sorry, I don't know what's going on with the microphone. Minimizing stress in the parlor is a really, really important thing. I think, especially when it comes to like letdown and milking time. I'm not sure it has implications on milk quality, but it definitely has implications on profitability. So,
yeah, and looking just at the whole picture, like someone may be cleaning every single teat end incredibly diligently, but they're doing so not wearing gloves and using a same towel on one animal and then moving to the next animal. And that farm is going to have a reduced milk quality and animal health versus a farm that might be moving faster, but but wearing gloves and not sharing towels. So just there are kind of best practices that show a lot of variation between farms that I think as an industry over time we should probably try to continue to research and hone down on what are the actual best practices that keep the animals healthy and keep the milk clean.
I think maybe what Carol might be getting at is the idea of like if you're spending 4 hours at each milking, like overall profitability in that time of like how long, yes, a bigger herd might take, not necessarily, sometimes you can milk more animals faster than you milk a few, smaller, fewer animals on a small farm. But thinking about this is kind of maybe slightly separate from or different from the milk quality topic, but timing of how long milking and chores take twice a day, and how much time that allows for other farm management and tasks. Yeah. And I shouted out Carol's book or guide in the chat for for Aaron, who was asking about a guide. And one idea for further goat work here in Vermont was updating Carol's guide, which was written in 2012, and is still a great resource. Yeah. So our contact info is here. Whitney, me, Daryll, and Holly. Please, yeah, feel free to reach out by email if folks have specific or general questions. Oh, and the survey again. Thank you. Or is this a different survey, Glenda? This is
Nope.
a
Yes. So
okay.
if folks haven't had a chance, I just wanted to share the survey again so
Thank
that
you.
the UVM team can gather more information to um, better understand the landscape in northern New England. And then additionally, I shared at the beginning, the team will be having a sheep and dairy goat focused milk quality webinar this Saturday at 11. So if folks want to join that, you can join via Zoom and you can get the recording. But I dropped the link in the chat if folks want to kind of follow the team and learn more about what they're doing with this programming. So thanks. I just wanted to share that.
Thank you, Glenda. Yeah, so the webinar this weekend will be different milk quality focus than this. This was kind of the findings of the UVM and QMPS work. On Saturday, it'll be in person in Burlington, Vermont, or online, and it will be led by Dr. Michelle Buckley, who works for QMPS and has a background in small ruminant dairy specifically, and she'll be talking about key factors, contributors to small ruminant milk quality. So different from this webinar. And yeah, would love for as many people to join as possible.